Welcome, everyone. We're just waiting to make sure everyone gets a chance to join. We'll get started in just a minute or so. All right. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. It's so great to be here. I'm Jae Sevelius, and I will be your host this evening at Narrative Medicine Rounds. On behalf of the Division of Narrative Medicine at Columbia University Irving Medical Center, I welcome those of you who are joining Rounds for the first time and welcome back all returning attendees. Narrative medicine arose at Columbia in 2001 and is now an international movement at the intersection of humanities, the arts, clinical practice, and healthcare justice. Narrative training equips clinicians to humbly try to comprehend their patients' experiences and perspectives so as to deliver equitable and effective healthcare. Rigorous training and practice of narrative medicine helps all those interested in person-centered, respectful healthcare to deepen their self-awareness, clinical attunement, collaborative skills, and creative capacities. Our commitments to healthcare justice underlie our writing, teaching, research, advocacy, and delivery of care. The narrative medicine community assembles monthly at Rounds to grow our knowledge, partnership, and commitment to a just and effective healthcare future. Before we introduce our speaker for tonight, I've been asked to mention a few basic Zoom ground rules to ensure the program goes smoothly. Please keep your microphone muted to cut down on background noise during the program. Be forewarned that if there are any disruptions or inappropriate comments in the chat, you may be removed from the event. During the talk, we ask people to keep chat interactions to a minimum, but as we get closer to the Q&A portion of the event, we will invite you to submit questions via chat for our speaker. But before then, we won't be monitoring questions, so please save your questions to type into the chat after we make the announcement. The event is being recorded. Everyone who registered will get the link to it a day or two after the event, and you can share it as you wish. Captioning will be available during tonight's event. At the end, we'll have a link to the online bookstores to order books or find more information about our speaker and about the Department of Medical Humanities and Ethics and the program in narrative medicine. And with that, I would like to welcome Lucy Sante. We're thrilled to have you, Lucy. Thank you so much for being here. Lucy Sante is a Belgian-American writer and critic and author of the recently published I Heard Her Call My Name, a Memoir of Transition, a memoir of a life spent pursuing a dream of artistic truth while evading the truth of her own gender identity, until, with the help of a face-altering photo app, at the age of 67, she turned to face who she really was. Sante's memoir braids together two threads of personal narrative, the arc of her life and her recent step-by-step transition to a place of inner and outer alignment. Sante brings a loving irony to her account of her unsteady first steps. There was much she found she still needed to learn about being a woman after some 60 years cloaked in a man's identity in a man's world. A marvel of grace and empathy, I Heard Her Call My Name parses with great sensitivity many issues that touch our lives deeply, of gender identity and far beyond. Lucy Sante is the author of Low Life, Evidence, The Factory of Facts, Kill All Your Darlings, Folk Photography, The Other Paris, Maybe the People Would Be the Times, and 19 Reservoirs. Her most recent book, I Heard Her Call My Name, was published in February. Her awards include a Whitting Writers Award, an award in literature from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, a Grammy Award for album notes, an Infinity Award from the International Center of Photography, and Guggenheim and Coleman Center fellowships. She recently retired after 24 years teaching at Bard College. I also understand Lucy has previously both studied and taught at Columbia. So welcome back, Lucy. And now I'd like to hand it over to you for the next 20 minutes or so before we get into the question and answer portion of today's event.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you all for having me. I'm very honored, and I must say it's an impressive thing to drop on one's friends. Columbia Narrative Medicine rounds. Nobody knows what that means, but it sounds great. I should say, by the way, sorry to be an idiot here, but it's Lucy Sante. I've been correcting people and pronouncing that for most of my life, and yet I still forget to do it. Anyway, so I've written this book. I heard her call my name, which you're seeing backwards, probably. And it represents my account of my gender transition, plus all the stuff that led up to it, which means essentially my entire life. I wrote this very quickly. Many of my other books have taken me many years to write. This one took about 2 months. It came out in a rush, a fire hose. And what it does is it goes back and forth between the first 6 months of my transition and the previous 66 years of my life. Not just, filling in the backdrop, but also giving an account of the many years of quite successful externally repression I engaged in at some interior cost, of course. So I'm going to read just a little bit from this book. It's a very hard book to read from because of the way it's written. But here's a section that kind of goes for the gusto. Appears on page 51 if you're following along at home. I did not have a strong gender identity when I was small. I drew pictures and played with my large family of stuffed animals to whom I assigned family roles. I read the adventures of the boy reporter Tintin, but I also read the purely quotidian adventures of Martine, a sort of every girl, which I must have been sent by a relative. I have a distinct but vague memory. I couldn't tell you the year or even the country, of being somewhere with my parents and picking something up, a magazine, a record, with a girl's face on it, and them laughing at me. I certainly took it as a warning to avoid displaying pictures of girls, to not, say, tack up pictures of Françoise Hardy all over my room after my paternal aunt and uncle, small-town news agents, began sending me the French teen magazine Salut les copains. But I didn't really know what the laughter meant. Were they laughing because it seemed suspiciously feminine that I would be interested in a girl in a magazine? Or was it because it seemed precociously heterosexual? That second one did not occur to me. But I was never pushed in any conspicuously masculine direction either. Despite his interest in sports, he was an avid basketball player in his youth, although 5 feet 2 inches. My father didn't seem to care that I felt no pull in that direction, and we never engaged in traditional male bonding exercises, not even tossing a ball back and forth. He also never taught me any of his skills: carpentry, plumbing, painting, paper hanging, even shoe repair. He'd at one point apprenticed with a cobbler, although that had more to do with class than with gender. The way he saw it, I would grow up to be an important person who would have laborers to do those things for him. He was eager that I extricate myself from the working class and earn my pay for the comfort of a desk chair. He had no objections to my being a writer. He was a frustrated writer himself, who in 1948 had published an O. Henry-like sketch in a newspaper under the byline Luke Sant. My mother never taught me her skills either, not even allowing anyone into the kitchen when she was cooking. Then her mother and her aunt had been legendary cooks, and she was forever made to feel like the graceless idiot daughter. Her repertoire of dishes was limited to recipes written down by her mother. Naturally, she would not have been wanted to be observed in her daily race against failure. I'm certain my mother wanted me to be a girl. She struggled with the reality of her stillborn daughter, conflated the two of us, maybe wanted to effect some kind of magical transference. There's a little footnote here. She once told me that before I was born, she went to have my sex identified by a man whose father had died before his birth. Such people apparently had special powers, who dangled a charm on a chain over her belly to see whether the ellipse it described was vertical or horizontal. I don't remember her telling me the result. Years later, she hotly denied the whole story. She feared men, probably with good reason, and would in any case have preferred someone like herself, sorry, like herself as much as her her girl cousins were like her, someone she could treat with the tenderness her own mother denied her. During our time together, when my father was at work, or when she and I were in Europe and he stayed behind working, I might just as well have been her daughter. I was quiet and timid and serious and cute, with big dark brown eyes, wore a kerchief over my head when it was windy, and a little wool bonnet that tied under my chin when it was cold, wore a Peter Pan collared dickie with my duckling yellow sweater, and displayed my little knees year-round between short pants and socks. I can't say with any kind of certainty just when the idea that I might or should be a girl first took hold, but probably it was around age 8 or 9 or 10. Sorry. I was an imaginative and fearful child who saw omens everywhere. If I came across a pulp illustration of a note nailed to a tree saying, "You will die tonight," I was certain I would die that night. My mother's religion assisted this compulsion powerfully, of course. Any word or act could send one to hell. My mother had put a holy water font just inside the doorway of my room, and I knew that if I didn't cross myself with the water every time I crossed the threshold, that I would die that night. I was constantly pleading with Jesus not to kill me yet, just as I might ask him for a record player or a visit to an amusement park, or to spare the lives of my parents as they were late getting back from the store and therefore surely in a car crash, or to prevent my mother from killing me when I got a bad report card. At some point, there came the question of the ability of Jesus to turn me into a girl overnight in my sleep. I don't remember whether Jesus proposed this or if I requested it of him, but there it was, and it wouldn't leave me alone. I trembled from both desperate wishfulness and naked fear. I naturally regret my lost girlhood, yearn hopelessly for it, although I'm drawn up short when I actually imagine what being my parents' daughter would have been like once past age 12 or so. I already chafed under their rules as a boy. My clothes and hair were regulated until I was nearly 18. My mother searched my room on any pretext and read every bit of writing she found there. She wanted an account of everywhere I went and everyone I met. She was constantly warning me about bad companions, when I obviously had no companions of any sort, all through middle school. But winning a scholarship to a Jesuit high school in New York City was my ticket out of jail. That would not have happened if I'd been a girl, and my parents' overprotectiveness would have been in full force for years longer. Would they even have allowed me to go to college on out of state? Would I have had to get married to get away from them? When I was around 12, the principal of my school, a nun, scheduled a consultation for me with a psychologist. I was going through a difficult period with no friends and near daily fights in the schoolyard, serious enough that I dislocated various fingers. The other kids hated that I read books for fun and knew the answers in class. I still had a bit of an accent and was being treated for a stutter by a speech therapist. At my consultation, I was shown ink blots, given word associations, made to tell stories about pictures, the usual routine. When I was asked to draw a picture of a man and a woman and tell a story about them, I drew George and Martha Washington and gave a factual account of their lives. I thought that was extremely clever. After the tests, the psychologist asked to speak privately with my parents. 20 minutes later, they stormed out, both of them furious. They wouldn't tell me what they'd learned. I just assumed he told them to ease up on the discipline and allow me more freedom. But who knows? It was right around then that I won the Arbor Day essay contest from my school. There was one winner from each of the schools in town. I was the only boy. When a photo of the five of us was published in the New Providence Dispatch, I appeared in the caption as Lucy Sante. So that gives you kind of the flavor of where I'm coming from as an immigrant and the child of very isolated immigrants. There weren't a lot of immigrants around the early 60s at all because of various racist restrictions. And my parents did not have a community to fall into. There weren't other, there were, we met, I think, every Belgian immigrant on the East Coast, and there were about, 12 of them or something. So I grew up very isolated. I didn't know any girls. And when I had this revelation that I should be a girl, I thought that I was the only person in the world to whom this had ever happened. And so, well, the book tells the story of how I went on from there to realize that there were other such people in the world, as I gradually realized, but they were all scattered, and I didn't know any. I didn't know what gender change meant. I didn't even know that until I finally got online at the end of the 90s. It was an information that you could pick up. You really had to dig, and I didn't even know how to dig. Plus, it had to be secret. Couldn't have anybody know. Why? Well, there was the society of the time. Later on, there were my ambitions. I didn't want to be professionally trans. And furthermore, I was attracted to women. When, that made it was difficult it was not a concept that was readily understood. In fact, the Harry Benjamin's directives for gender transition included the requirement that the patient be attracted to the quote opposite sex once they had transitioned, keeping everyone heterosexual. So I think it's time for Jay to take over and start asking me some questions.
Thank you so much, Lucy. That was that was wonderful. I really enjoyed your book. It was such a powerful memoir, such a powerful account of your unique story, but you also talk about how trans people's stories are all very similar and all very individual. And you have such an interesting history. You capture such an interesting period of time with the birth of the internet and kind of growing up alongside the internet and how that changed and shaped your transition. Um, and you're also just such an incredibly accomplished author, and you seem to work in multiple genres. You work in nonfiction, you've written song lyrics, cultural commentary, and autobiography, and your work spans several decades. And so in 2022, you published a very powerful essay in Vanity Fair called On Becoming Lucy Sante, which I believe was the first time you publicly discussed your transition or at least published on it. Um, and in I Heard Her Call My Name, you wrote about this very profound ambivalence that you had when you had your revelation, or as you talked about it, when your egg first cracked. So, can you talk about what inspired you and gave you the courage to write that piece for Vanity Fair initially, and then a whole memoir about your experience?
Well, writing that Vanity Fair piece, the assignment came directly from actually the first time I came out in full public with, the only social medium I use is Instagram. I came out on Instagram in September of 2021. And within 24 hours, I had 4 offers to write my story. And I went with Vanity Fair because there's an editor there who I like very much. And also because I thought I might get a glam photo shoot out of it, right? But also I'm a writer, and anything that affects me profoundly is going to be turned into a book at some point. Um, in this case, as I mentioned in the book, the 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 key thing, the token that allowed me to slip from one thing to another was this app, basically an AI device, that allowed you to take a photograph, a portrait, and alter it in different ways, make it older or younger, grayer, darker, whatever. But it had a gender swap feature, and I put through a picture, and it was sufficiently convincing. I'd never seen myself as a woman. I've only dressed up a handful of times in my life and left no photographic evidence. I was doing all this stuff under deep cover, so I'd never seen myself. And so I went through and passed through this app every picture I had of myself, beginning about age 11 or so. So I had this whole panorama of my life as a woman, and it just shook me to my core. And that was determining thing. And I guess it's partly because I'm very visual. I'm involved with photography. Um, and this was like St. Thomas putting his finger in the wound. I had evidence.
And I just want to say the photo shoot you did for Vanity Fair was indeed very glamorous, gorgeous, gorgeous photos. Um, you open both the Vanity Fair article and your book early on talking about this photo app, the face altering app, and how powerful that experience was for you in kind of in you coming to your realization. And when you also talk about the importance of online chat groups and the support that you got there and the information that you got on the internet. And so I found it so markedly contrasted with how how little information you had growing up, how little access and how few role models. And you talk a lot about just not having examples, not having the language. And, it's interesting because you talk about how you have kind of like a wistfulness about not having transitioned earlier on in life or kind of missing out on the experience of being a younger woman. So I guess I'd love to hear how you think the internet might have one shaped your transition and how things may have been different if you had had access to information earlier on in life.
Right. Well, just the fact alone to realizing that not only are there other people who want to switch their gender, but I mean, the impression I got from my particular perch in the 70s and 80s and even the 90s was that it was a scattering. It was a rare few people here and there, mostly in cities. And they mostly led lives that were different from mine. I didn't know any personally, except I did at one remove, really. But I was scared. And as far as knowledge of what transition meant, I honestly didn't know about how hormones worked. That had to wait until I was online. And just to put things in perspective, I went online in 1997, which means I was 43 years old already. I did not grow up alongside the internet. That happened when I was, in the doldrums of full middle age. And even there, things broke through slowly. And even there, there was so much. Well, I write in the book how everything in life involves play acting. There are different kinds of play acting, and a lot of the play acting I saw from trans people before that, um, it was a certain kind of, it was like drag. It was Baroque self-expression that didn't really match me. I tend to be, I like performing, but I'm low key, and given to muted colors. Anyway, the I just got all kinds of information from the web, and including more recently, And this also I owe to the web and also having taught at Bard for 24 years, because it happened around the same time that I started noticing online people who were trans but were normal. And by normal I mean not putting on a Las Vegas floor show routine, but just going about their lives, um, which I needed personally. And by the same token, I was teaching at Bard, and I saw the wave come probably about 15 years ago is when I started noticing fair number of students with non-binary pronouns, and then gradually students who were transitioning. And they felt completely normal. These felt like people I could identify with, even though they were 40 years younger than me. So that was a real turning point.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, speaking of that, you talk about in several places really identifying as binary in terms of your gender, and you've said, quote, "It's where I come from."
Mhm.
And as a writer, I'm sure you've thought a lot about the peculiarities of language and trans subcultures. And so I'm wondering if you could say more about what being binary means to you and how this relates to or has been informed by the ever evolving language around gender.
Well, yeah, I'm binary because, I thought about being a girl all those years. It didn't involve anything in between. I wasn't particularly attracted to the idea of something in between. And I can only put that to acculturation. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. Um, and as far as the language goes, that's something I feel very distant from, the whole use of language. Um, First of all, I mean, I have younger trans friends, quite a few, but partly because of my age and partly also because of geographic isolation. I'm up here in the Hudson Valley and really don't know that many people up here, period, of any kind. So I'm not in daily contact or even weekly contact with any sort of trans community. The use of language is something I come across online and in print. Um, and I tend to be old school, in that as in many other things. Um, and neologisms, you know, I'm sorry to say this, but it's true. I like neologisms when they come up from the street. Too many of these neologisms today have the smell of the seminar room, and I spent enough years in the seminar room to know that there's a distinction there. Um, so so I'm happy to continue using my language as I do throughout the book. It's it's so hard to find words for some of these things. Um, I used the word transness a few times in the book because I didn't know how else to put it. And then I saw a short video by a trans woman online saying that we shouldn't use transness because it implied an ideology. So, when faced with the possible critique of every word usage one can make, you just have to go for the simple ones. I always believe in keeping it simple.
Hmm. Hmm. And you talk in your book about sort of the similarities of between your experience of immigrating from Belgium as a young person and your experience with your transition as an adult. And you talk about this very poetically. There's a number of quotes that I really love where you talk about the distinct rhyme between gender transition and the sort of transitioning you had to do as an immigrant. You said both involved rapid, total, full body education, at once accumulating tiny details and apprehending gestalt. I love that because it's visceral. You can kind of feel the embodiedness of that. So I wonder if you could say a little bit about that, the distinct rhyme between those experiences.
Well, one thing that occurred to me is the fact that um, during my first, well, 6 months especially, but at least maybe a year, maybe more, when I first woke up in the morning, I would be in this kind of interzone. Um, it's sort of, I was neither male nor female. I didn't know who I was for a minute. And that reminded me of when I started learning English, which has happened in school. I went to school in America not knowing any English. And for a while, there was a buffer zone between languages, like an hour on either end. I'd speak French at home, go to school in English, come back home and speak French again. And between those, there would be buffers where I couldn't speak either language. So this was very similar. And yeah, it was it was a lot easier becoming Lucy than it was becoming Americanized. I'll tell you that much, partly because I was so young, um, but also because, well, especially at that time, taking on being passing, you see, because there was no immigrant structure for me to fall into. So I had to pass as an American. And that was a much more difficult and involving procedure than any of this gender stuff has been.
Fascinating. And you attribute that mostly to being a young person, the
Yeah, to
fluidity
being a
of
young
that.
person and to being young and also just encountering the idea that over here we're in another land and across the ocean where they do things differently. And furthermore, there's about seriously about a 30-year technological gap between the two societies at the time. So it felt like time travel.
Wow. Wow. That's powerful. Um, uh, so another thing I wanted to ask you about is, when you describe yourself in the book, a lot of how you describe yourself as a young person and a middle-aged person is shaped by fear, vulnerability, self-consciousness. You wrote that you were, quote, terrified of being seen. And then as opposed to how you describe yourself now, or at least when your egg first cracked, as, quote, wanting to be seen.
Mm.
And I actually found this quote from you in the Oldster questionnaire you responded to, and I absolutely love this. You said, "It's a bittersweet recompense that in exchange for having lost out on my life as a girl and as a young and middle-aged woman, I should instead have gained the unexpected ability to not give a rat's ass what anyone thinks."
Yeah.
I love that. And I can't speak for everyone, but I do think that most of us wish we could get to that place of not giving a rat's ass. Um, so can you say more about how your experiences in your life, including your transition, helped you get to that place of not giving a rat's ass and how it feels to be there? If
Well,
you, assuming you're still there.
yeah. Well, for not giving a rat's ass, a lot of that is just simply age, period. Um, I'm not trying to impress my peers anymore. I don't really know what, if anything, would impress the people younger than me. I'm not trying to impress them either because they have whole different ball game on their hands than I do. Um, but also, I've got to say that one unexpected feature of transitioning is how normal it feels. It just, I went through a while of being worried about, am I coming off, am I standing right? Am I sitting right? And now I just do not give a shit. Partly because it just feels natural. What can I say? Um, the one thing I was going to change about myself, which I have not had any surgeries and I'm not planning any, partly because I'm too damn old. Um, if I were 30 or 40 years younger, I would surely have some surgeries, but it's past the point now. The one thing I was going to do was the voice procedure at Beth Israel. I actually signed up. I was on the waiting list. But then before my time could come up, I had to record my audio book. So then bang, the cows were out of the barn. Why bother? Everybody's heard this voice. So that's, gone by the by. Um, And just in general, the fact is that I walk around not thinking, am I coming off well, but thinking, this is who I am, and y'all had better like it because I'm there, I'm not looking to make any more major changes in my life. I have made that change and I'm very happy with it.
Hmm. That's so inspiring. And I think that is probably very inspiring to many trans people and to people in general who we all want to see that there are many ways of being who we are in the world. There's many ways of being a woman in the world. There are many ways of, being ourselves, and that we can be okay with ourselves exactly the way that we are, and it doesn't make us any less of a human being, any less valuable, any less authentic. So I find that incredibly powerful. And I really appreciate you talking about in your book about just the at the end of the book you talk more about sort of the process and the motivation for writing the memoir, and about kind of situating yourself within kind of current trans communities. And it made me think about trans people who want to tell their stories,
Mm.
and how we need these stories in the world. So I'm wondering if you have advice for trans people, maybe some of them in the audience or people who listen to this later on, if you have advice for people who want to tell their stories.
I would just say be as specific as possible because weirdly, and this is not just about trans memoirs, but it's true about writing in general. I think the more grounded in specifics you are, the more you have a possibility of being universally understood. Too many trans memoirs, and I've read a whole bunch of them, too many of them lapse into rhetoric, which does no good at all. It just, okay, that's what you believe, great. Put it in a little box and put it up there. Um, Rhetoric doesn't help anyone. It's just the same shit over and over again from different mouths. Um, but um, but the actual process of everybody's coming out is an eternal fascination for me. And I've met all kinds of people, mostly through correspondence. People write to me, and I've heard some amazing stories. I mean, I I've met a person who I've become friends with, who is my age, transitioned as a teenager because her family was well connected medically, and has been stealth for the last 50 years, meaning that there's I and another person are the only ones who know that she's trans. And that's wow, I'd never heard that story before. But it happens a lot that, I listen to some, especially older people. We've all gotten to where we are through such different routes and different kinds of exposure to the phenomenon and different ages, different levels of confidence. And that to me is just, I love it. I love the difference. The differences among us all is what makes me feel at home, actually.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful thing about our communities. And speaking of specifics, one of the things I really enjoyed about your book, as someone who just recently moved to Manhattan about a year and a half ago, I loved reading all the specifics about your experiences in living in New York City, moving to New York City, living in New York City through the, what was it, 70s, 80s,
90.
90s.
Mhm.
And some of the venues, the people you worked with, the record store, the bookstore, that just so you had these incredible gritty details that were also just very visceral. How did you generate all those details, those memories? Like had referred to yourself as an archivist. Do you have diaries? Do you have clippings? How did you access all those details from so long ago?
No, I've never kept a diary for more than about 3 days at a time. And I don't even have my archives, personal archives, because I sold them to the New York Public Library some years back. Um, So this is all out of my memory. Every bit of the book is out of my memory. I'm lucky that I have a kind of an organized memory. Things are on shelves up there. I'm um, I'm always thinking of a Saul Steinberg cartoon in which the centuries are represented at separate bookshelves. It's kind of like that inside my head. So if I want to pinpoint, the month of July 1975, I can zoom in. So I'm very fortunate that way.
Amazing. That's incredible because that I really appreciated the level of detail. I'm going to ask one more question and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. So if the audience wants to, if you all want to start putting your questions in the chat, that's fine. Um, so I'm curious what the reception has been like to your book so far from, both from kind of the literary world as well as the trans world. And I'm also curious if anything has surprised you about the experience of the book coming out and its reception.
The reception has been absolutely great. First of all, excuse me, I have a cold, by the way. First of all, I was fully, I spent, especially my first year of transitioning, I had, my dukes were ready to be, I was expecting fights. I really was. I was expecting aggression. I was expecting active resistance. And lucky for me, in my time and place, I did not get any. Um, I didn't lose a single person. I mean, this is one of the advantages of age too, is all those censorious elders are dead. Um, and so um, it was very fulfilling right away that when as well as a detail in the book, I sent a coming out letter to about 30 people, and all of them responded really nicely. And since then, I've kept hearing from people and gotten a lot of reviews. I've done a million podcasts. Um, and the reviews, mostly get things right. Although they always get things wrong. I know that I say that as a former book critic myself. Um, and Gee, what surprised me the most? This is interesting. I'm not really sure. Um, maybe well, one thing that's really gratified me is how many cis women have told me that they could relate to my depiction of womanhood. That was really gratifying because, I was never sure. I mean, how much of this is actually based on observation and how much is, the observer paradox of, my own un unrecognized fictions that I'm introducing. So to hear that, my accounts of things outside myself were more or less accurate was very, very heartening. So maybe the biggest surprise really is that except for I have gotten one attack in a right-wing periodical, kind of soft right, I guess. Um, but aside from that, the reception has been so overwhelmingly positive that really has taken me by surprise.
Amazing. I'm so glad to hear that. Um, I'm going to choose a few questions from the chat to read on behalf of some of our audience members. The first one I'd like to read is there were a few religious references in the text that you just read. Could you speak about the role religion has or has not played in the process of you arriving at this point?
Well, religion was a major force in my young life because my mother was a peasant Catholic, really, almost animist. No theology involved, great belief in statues, medals, scapulars, all that impedimenta of Roman Catholicism in Western Europe. And she was a fanatic about it, really. My father quoted to me Pascal's wager when I was young, so I knew right away where he was coming from. Um, anyway, religion was a powerful repressive force, and it fell off me when I was about 13. I just stopped believing, like from one day to the next. And even though I, went on to Catholic high school, it never came back. Um, but with my mother, it was very much present. My mother gave me trouble every day of my life, and I can barely imagine how my mother would have reacted if I come out during her lifetime. Um, but religion has not, especially since her death, religion has not played a significant role in my life.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'd like to paraphrase a couple of questions and take us into the realm of healthcare and really thinking about um, how your experience maybe within the healthcare system, how that might, you sharing a bit about that might help inform us about, tools or things that we can do to support trans people that we see in different types of medical practices. Has there been things that have been particularly helpful to you? Can you speak about your experiences either with medical care or mental health care? If
Mm.
you've, I know you write a bit about your therapists as well.
Right. Well, so I've been pretty much solidly in therapy since for like something like 38 years. Um, and there was one therapist who's very, very important in my life. Um, the one who revealed to me the truth about my childhood, for example, because I had been robotically repeating, I had a happy childhood. I had a happy childhood until he came along and set me straight. Um, and to him, I confessed that I had tried on my mother's clothes a few times, but we never got beyond that because he died of a massive heart attack about 20 minutes after I left his office one day. Um, this was about 1992, something like that. So it's theoretically possible that I might have come out a lot sooner had he lived. Um, but my current therapist was so, when I came, she was the first person I came out to before my partner or my son or anybody. Um, and she was so completely laid back about it. She said, "Oh, it sounds like a good idea." And just recently I asked her, like, "Did you suspect anything?" No. But she just accepted it right away. And I was also lucky because I joined the local trans support group up here in the Hudson Valley, and they gave me the name of the local endocrinologist, and I was recently informed that she feels flattered that I refer to her in the book as an endocrinologist, but she's actually a GP. But I knew her in the function that she prescribed my my estradiol. She was and did not give me a hard time, did not give me the third degree, was sympathetic and understanding from the word go. And through a weird coincidence, her husband is my GP. So it's all in the family. It's very good. Um, and thanks to those folks, it's been a smooth ride. And I can't tell you how grateful I am because there are many, many other places in the United States, in the world, where nothing like the experience I've had is possible. Look at England. Look at people being on the lists um, for medical transition for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. It's crazy. Um, there's no need for that kind of thing, except that it's inscribed prejudices in the system. Um, Fortunately, and things may yet change. Who knows? After this election coming up, I'm terrified. I guess all of you are too, probably. Um, but I've had a very smooth ride myself.
Hmm. Hmm. And have you, we are in a period of time right now where there's a lot of anti-trans legislation coming up at the state level
Mhm.
across the country related to access to gender affirming healthcare, related to lots around trans youth, being able to use the bathroom of their gender at school, being able to use their chosen name and pronouns. Um, and I'm wondering, like, have you had conversations about like kind of how your book, how your experience is situated in this very current context where people are legitimately afraid of having their rights taken
Yeah,
away?
of course. And, that was on my mind as I was writing the book, although I gotta say that one of the ways in which, well, the way in which the book now seems a little dated to me is because I turned it in December 2022, and the activity, the making of transgender people into the folk devils happened very much in 2023 after I turned in my manuscript. So it feels a bit like I'm not addressing the questions, although I did want it to be a personal book, not a declaration. Nevertheless, it's terrifying. And I just, every type of opportunity I get, I say, look, because I'm addressing cis people a lot. I'm not, a lot of trans writers write for trans readers. I'm addressing largely cis people, I think. Um, and I want to say to them, look, it's a physical fact. It is not about sex. It's sex adjacent, but everything in life is sex adjacent. Um, it's a physical fact. It's like being double jointed or albino or left-handed for that matter. And believe me, when I was when I was in school in Belgium as a little kid, they were still forcing lefties to write with their right hands. That's a parallel to my mind. Um, Furthermore, if you are very young, and it sometimes kills me because I remember my adolescence very well. And when I hear people referring to 17-year-olds as children, I both recognize and sort of agree. I mean, I'm a parent myself after all, but I also take that as personal insult because I would have when I was 17. I'm not a child. And certainly with a matter like this, with gender, um, I really believe when, early on in life. It happens at different ages for different people. Some people know when they're 3, some people don't know until adolescence, but And as far as being influenced by the culture, don't forget that puberty blockers are reversible. There's nothing that's being done to teenagers that can't be undone if they change their minds later on. Fact is, almost nobody changes their mind. You get 1 or 2 examples that keep being used over and over again by the anti-trans crowd.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I think there's so much I could say about that, and so many thoughts. I see we only have a couple of minutes. You actually did answer a couple of the questions in the chat. The one other thing I wanted to ask was from one of our audience members, like since experiencing life as a woman, have you experienced sexism, and what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I haven't really experienced sexism, except in the sense that one thing I read in the book is I'm afraid that I've lost my invisibility, which is, something about being a male that was rooted in self-loathing. But I really felt like nobody sees me. I'm anonymous. And the fact is, and I've lost that now that I've changed genders, except that I'm older. And being an older woman makes me doubly invisible. I mean, I'm really not seen. And that's okay by me, that's all right. I don't mind being invisible. I have a long experience of it. Um, Aside from that, you know, nobody's been rude to me. And I've traveled. It's not, I mean, the the worst experiences I've had have been in France. I'm a French speaker, and the convention about, even if you like stop and buy a newspaper, there's a whole exchange, bonjour, monsieur, merci, madame, au revoir, madame. And the fact that I would be greeted as bonjour, madame, and then I open my mouth and I become monsieur, that hurt. But it was kind of inadvertent. It wasn't anybody trying to hurt me. So I've just been lucky, I'm a bit of an eminence, so I haven't, faced any. I mean, I taught in the very liberal college and only did it for one semester really after I transitioned, and then I started the downslope toward retirement. So I haven't really faced the bad things that other people have faced, and I'm constantly checking my privilege.
Thank you so much, Lucy. In conclusion, there was just another couple of comments about how much people loved your story about the face altering app and thought that it could really benefit people in the trans communities to be reading about that and thinking about that. And so thank you for that. Lots of thank yous in the chat. And I just want to say what an honor it's been to talk with you tonight, and congratulations on writing such an incredible story and thank you for inspiring us with your courage and your openness and your authenticity. Thanks to everybody for being here tonight. I just want to remind everyone that a recording of tonight's event will be shared later this week via email to all who registered. And we hope to see you all next month on May 1st when we welcome Andrew Leland. Here are some links where you can buy Lucy Sante's book. I heard her call my name. Highly recommended. If you haven't read it yet, go get it. It's fantastic. And we'll see you in May with Andrew Leland. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, everyone.